Peaceful march across Brooklyn Bridge turns into evening mayhem. Large crowds that included up to 1,000 cyclists crossed over the Brooklyn Bridge as part of a Black Lives Matter protest Saturday afternoon. A number of groups joined the protest that later morphed into a vandalism spree throughout Lower Manhattan, Chinatown, and Little Italy. Outdoor restaurant patrons having a front row seat to the protest antics that included tossing trash cans and debris into the streets and lighting fires along the way. A number of arrests were made at Mulberry and Delancey Streets when riot police moved in on shield-carrying protesters who were taken into custody. There were 14 arrests at this location. Only minor injuries were reported, police said. Several police vehicles were vandalized along the way during the evening protest, some being hit with graffiti, others with flat tires or broken windows. One police van had a sign with a picture of George Floyd with wooden pole punctured through a windshield. The bicyclist protests made their way through the center of the city, taking out lanes at one point of West Street. The smaller group of nearly 500 people marched through Lower Manhattan at one point seeking to approach City Hall, only to be blocked by a row of police officers seeking to keep them away from the newly cleaned plaza. Protesters then marched into Little Italy, where numerous restaurants had set up outdoor dining, many desperate to recoup their losses from being closed during the pandemic. Many of the diners stood and clapped for the protesters in a show of support. However, some protesters taunted diners, a few knocking over trash cans and pulling them into the street to block vehicles, and more specifically, police from following them. Some protesters lit fires in trash bins, restaurant owners rushing out with pitchers of waters to extinguish the flames. Hey, I understand they want to protest, but we are barely holding onto our businesses, one belligerent restaurant owner said on Mulberry Street. Why do they have to make a mess, starting fires, and throw our chairs into the street? Many marching could be seen wearing yellow, something's that been seen by the Wall Street of Moms protesting in Portland, Oregon. The demonstration began Saturday afternoon at Cadman Plaza and continue over the bridge using the roadway, not the pedestrian crossway. Police escorted the protesters safely across the bridge, but kept heavy police present at City Hall Park, where several protesters said they wanted to retake the plaza after Occupy City Hall was cleaned on Tuesday. A massive clean-up on the plaza is still ongoing, with neighboring buildings still to be cleaned of graffiti. Demonstrators emphasized that it is important for people to continue to show up. The police presence was large, specifically on the Manhattan side of the bridge near City Hall, but the protesters avoided clashes around that area. The march ended after throngs of riot cops converged on the protesters who were blocking Delancey Street. A row of protesters with wooden shields put up a meager defense as cops confiscated their shields, and arrested them. The protests Saturday was much larger than protests seen in recent days across the city. The protests were also in sympathy with the demonstrators in Seattle and Portland, where riot conditions were reported and many arrests and injuries occurred. The protests have continued in some ways, even as police departments have suffered heavy budget cuts and crime has spiked throughout the city and nation.